Okay, I think it's time to get started. On behalf of the Great Lakes Vegetable Working Group, the University of Illinois Extension, and the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Extension Grant, we welcome you to the Season Extension Pest Management webinar series. My name is Jim Jasinski, and I'm with Ohio State University Extension, the IPM program, and I'll be one of your hosts for tonight's webinar. Backing me up and doing most of the behind-the-scenes technical organization is Liz Maynard, an extension specialist with Purdue University. We are also grateful to Purdue for allowing us to use their Adobe Connect software to bring the first 3 webinar series to you. Tonight we open with our first webinar, the Introduction to Pest Management for Season Extension. For this topic, we have brought together 4 of the most knowledgeable presenters in the eastern half of the United States to give you an overview of season extension basics and the basics of insect, disease,
Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. Going from supposed to be the last of the evening to the first, but basically my topic tonight's going to be weed control in high tunnels. Actually, that's one of the first things we want to do when we're getting started with high tunnel production is choose a site that does not have any perennial and hopefully has a small weed bank, annual weed seed bank. We've been doing high tunnel research and demonstration down here at the OSU South Centers at Piketon, which is the southernmost research station that Ohio State has, and actually began our work back in '96. Didn't have a lot of money back in them days, and we still don't today, but we salvaged this cold frame structure that you see on the slides it was heading to the scrapyard up at OARDC at Wooster. So we heard about it and went up with the truck and trailer and salvaged it and turned a 100-foot structure into 2 50-foot tunnel structures. And since that time, we've been working with strawberries, tomatoes, cucumbers, raspberries, blackberries, done a little bit of everything since '96 there. And that I would see as the most important thing is preparing that site and getting those weeds and that weed seed bank well under control. And I'm sure Bill's going to talk about it, but just getting that site prepared in general, high fertility and so forth. But we'll leave that up to Bill, and I'm going to talk about the weed control that we need to keep in mind. First, we need to define what is a weed. A weed, most of us think of as an annual or perennial weed that is something that we cannot harvest, something that just gets in the way. But it can also be a crop. Say we had a previous crop of corn or buckwheat or some crop like that in there, and then we put the tunnel up and started production in that tunnel. That buckwheat could come up, and that would actually be a weed seed that could infect our tunnel production in the future. So just a definition of weed we need to keep in mind. It's a plant that is not valued where it is growing and is usually of vigorous growth, especially one that tends to overgrow or chuck out more desirable weeds. There's some basic pest management considerations we need to do when we're talking about weed control in the high tunnel. And again, it's pretty simple, but just some things we need to keep in mind. One is that site preparation. When we're looking at high tunnels, there's so much well in advance work that has to be done to prepare that site properly. So first we need to have that soil that tunnel is going to be constructed over the top of in tip-top shape, and that includes weed control as well as some drainage issues and so forth. But getting those perennial and annual weed seed banks in check well before we put that tunnel up is very important. And it has to be done well in advance. That's probably the most important thing. We like to think out 1, 2, 3 years. I have growers contacting me right now that are wanting to put a tunnel up and start production here in February or March, and that gets me a little worried when we don't have as long of a time period there between putting the tunnel up and actually starting the cropping production. So we would like to get that done well in advance. There's some herbicides that are available for that pre-plant or pre-construction of the tunnel. When it comes to herbicides in the tunnels, really we don't recommend any because each state's Department of Agriculture, the pesticide regulations, each has a different way of looking at labeling of pesticides used in tunnels and so forth. So for tonight's presentation, we're not even going to get into that because it's so state specific. But what we're talking about herbicides here is when we are getting that site prepared before we actually put the tunnel up. So if we have some perennial weed problems, we're going to want to choose a herbicide that's going to translocate down into that root system, into whether it's rhizomes or what have you, depending on the weed species, to control those weeds well in advance. Practicing good sanitation, that's very important for all of our vegetable crops production, but really important when it comes to high tunnels. We really don't want to have any weeds going to seed, like I said, 1, 2, 3 years prior to the construction of that tunnel, and just trying to reduce that weed seed bank as much as we can. We need to utilize appropriate materials, and each of our extension services have great weed ID manuals and so forth that will help with IDing the weed species that we're going to be dealing with, because without a proper ID, we really don't know what type of control measures we need to do in order to get the weeds under control. And that all comes down to just weed knowledge. We have to know for sure what weed species we're dealing with, the life cycle. We'll touch base on that a little bit here later, but for the most part, we can educate ourselves well in advance of the life cycles of those weeds. Whenever we're approaching weed control in the tunnels, we basically have a toolbox that we're working with. First one is sanitation, and like I said, that can begin well in advance of the construction of the tunnel. We do have mechanical and physical means of weed control. Herbicide issue, again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but that varies by state to state, but we're looking at mainly the herbicide usage prior to the building of that tunnel. And then knowing that weed knowledge, and that can come from lots of different manuals, a lot of good university publications out there, and most of the universities have a vegetable, fruit, weed scientist on staff that can assist with developing that knowledge. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the components of a weed management plan. Perennial weed control, that's probably the worst. We definitely don't want to be locating that tunnel in a field or an area that has perennial weed issues, such as thistles, dogbane, some of the other perennial weeds. We want to make sure most of those may need even over a year of advanced planting. So the more further in advance we can prevent those from growing and reduce that weed population, the better. Reducing that soil weed seed bank, if we just say we have an old hog lot that maybe Jimson weed is a problem, and we know that's been a hog lot for 10, 20 years, then we probably want to try to avoid that until we get that weed seed bank reduced. Controlling the annual weeds soon after planting. That's once we actually have the tunnel up and we're actually growing. But if we do get some weed growth in that soil, in the tunnel, just like we do in the fields, keeping those weeds well under control from the very beginning. Julie was asking about some organic herbicides, and again, I'm not going to really talk about the herbicide issues tonight because that varies so widely, but there are, for those of you that are organic growers, you know that there's a pretty extensive listing of pesticides that are labeled for use by organic growers. So I would refer to that list. I know we've done some research down here at our research station with some like vinegar solutions and so forth. Our Soil and Water Resources program has, and they've done okay. But again, I think we'll refer that to some of our weed and herbicide specialists. We're just talking about possibly the control of the weeds with mechanical, physical, and prior planting tonight. just like in the fields, controlling the weeds before you see them. Once you see them, it's pretty tough to physically control them, even mechanically. We want to try to control those weeds before we ever see them pop up. We're in that white string stage, just when the roots have just started forming under the soil. We tear and cultivate those out, and that'll give us better control. Keeping the weeds out, keeping the neighbor's weeds out of your tunnel is also important. Say we're rolling up the sides, and all of a sudden the neighbor's thistle patches went to seed, and all of a sudden we see the white fluff balls like blowing our way onto our property and into our tunnel. That just takes some management to try to control those weeds from getting inside our tunnel. And then controlling the weeds throughout the season and seasons. Many of us doing high tunnel production on a year-round basis. Even here in the wintertime, we can have winter annuals that can be a problem in the tunnel. And so we want to make sure we don't slack on our weed control just because it's not the summer season, because we have another whole host of weeds that will cause us problems come wintertime. So just basic weed biology. Again, there's many good publications out there from the extension services that we can use to try to learn this weed biology and just know what those life cycles are. Know what weeds are going to be common in your area. Plus, it helps if you farm that field for a while, making sure that you know the weed seed bank you're dealing with, the weed problems you're dealing with, and just knowing when that needs to be controlled, depending on the life cycle of that weed. If we do use herbicides, again, prior to building that tunnel, we want to make sure we get the ones that are going to be used that are the most sensitive to that weed species, and also apply them for the best timing we have for control of those. We've done some research with Dr. Doug Doohan here at Ohio State, who's our weed specialist with fruit and vegetable crops, and just going to the fields and watching the germination of some of these weed species. Common ground sorrel, for instance, that weed species will continue to germinate basically all year round. We've gotten germination counts even into November and December with that common ground sorrel. And as we all know, if we're here in the Midwest with the grain farms, we know mare's tail is a problem that we're continuing to have, and the germination of that weed species almost year round. We see that growing with our soybean crops, and we can actually have that weed species in our tunnels and our vegetable crops. And just knowing that reproductive biology of that weed species. How does it come up? Is it strictly seed formation? Is it rhizomes? How does that weed species carry over in our fields? So preparation, again, the pre-plant weed control just starts with, I'd like to see it before that tunnel ever goes up. We can just eliminate a whole host of problems just by doing some prior planning. And I wouldn't be in a big hurry. I'm sure we all want to get into production and start making money from our tunnels, but we can actually lose a lot of money by putting it in a poor location that hasn't been controlled, that the weed species are just out of control, and that you'd be a total waste of your money. Some of the species we see there in the pictures, we got the mare's tail, which is the picture in the middle, and on the left. That darn stuff can come up anywhere. There it's growing next to a sidewalk. I mean, it just comes up everywhere. And then the Canadian thistle patches. You definitely would not want to locate a tunnel right where that thistle patch is, or we'd be having all kinds of problems. Okay, pre-plant weed control, we've mentioned it several times, but it does start at least 1 year before the growing season, before we build that tunnel. Again, I'd like to be 2-3 years out, but we'd really like to see that weed control start well in advance of putting up that tunnel. What do we use? Again, different herbicide formulations for different weed species. Just check and read the label. And again, I've never used herbicides in a tunnel. And again, that can change from state to state, because I know our Department of Agriculture has one way of looking at using pesticides in tunnels, and then other states' Department of Agriculture have another way of looking at them. So for right now, we'll just try to use all of our herbicides before we ever put that tunnel up. frequent tillage in advance of putting that tunnel up, that'll help control the weeds. We get a flush of annual weeds, we knock them out. Get another flush. Every time we get a flush and knock that out, we're getting a reduction in our weed seed bank. And then we all know the benefits of cover crops. We've had cover crops research going on here at the South Centers for many years, as well as other states, and we all know that the cover crops have some allelopathic effects on certain weed species. Plus, it's just good for the soil to build up that soil organic matter. Perennial weeds, as we can see there, not only going to reproduce by seed, but then we have underground rhizomes that they're going to reproduce by. They go through several stages. We got the seedling stage, vegetative stage, bud stage, early flowering, faux flowering, mature crop, regrowth, and that can happen 2, 3, 4 times in a growing season. So perennial weeds are probably the toughest. If we put up a tunnel and there's already perennial weeds in that problem area, it's going to be a nightmare to control them. So if you have any perennial weeds coming up close by where you're going to put that tunnel up, let's get them controlled well in advance. Even perennial weeds, say we don't have good herbicides that will translocate down to those rhizomes, we can deplete those rhizomes of that, say, thistle plant, just by repeating and knocking it down, just trying to deplete that rhizome and them underground root structures of any energy. Every time we knock it down, it has to put up new growth, and we just continue that for 2 or 3 years, and we might have done a pretty good job of controlling those perennial weeds. Annual weeds, as we all know, they're the ones that complete their life cycle in at least 1 year, but we mentioned some of those others like mare's tail and so forth. They can go through several generations of population all in a 12-month period. But those are usually, the annual weeds are usually complete their life cycle in 1 year or less, and usually are producing by seed. Some of our summer annuals, the morning glories, the cockleburs, the lamb's quarters, the ragweeds, we would start controlling those in the spring. Now, we're talking tunnels here, so what does a tunnel do? It actually enhances our spring season. So spring usually comes in April for us. We're looking at maybe controlling some of these weeds in at least 4 to 6 weeks earlier. So just remember that. You may not see them in the field yet, but because of the effects of what we're after with a tunnel, enhancing that growth, the weed life cycle is also going to be enhanced. So just keep that in mind. These are these winter annuals we need to keep in mind. That can be chickweed. It can be henbit, the big purple field on the right. If you have a field that's looking like this come springtime with all that henbit, you might want to give it a second thought before you go and build a tunnel in that field. It's just going to be a weed mess for you if they don't get that under control. And then the middle section, there's the mare's tail. That's that weed that has its just about year-round life cycle. Here's some pictures of mechanical physical control. That's one of my growers up on the top left. They will actually put tomatoes in this tunnel. This is a hay grove tunnel, and they will actually put the plastic, put the beds, and put a cover crop in between those beds here in the fall for those will be ready to go then come spring. The picture on the top right, that's one of we have a blackberry planting in a tunnel here, and that blackberry planting is on landscape fabric. So that's another way that we can actually just form a barrier there to help reduce the weed growth and the weed population in that row. And then don't park the cultivator. That's what I tell all my farmers. And even in the tunnels, we don't want to park the cultivator. We just want to continue to go ahead and continue to cultivate those weeds as we see them, and that'll get us hopefully ahead of them. And then you got hand hoeing, stoop labor, hand pulling. We all are used to that because we're all vegetable growers. But just don't want to put the hose up. Don't want to quit bending over and pulling the weeds. We just want to stay ahead of them. When it comes to controlling the weeds with a herbicide, again, there's no real magic bullet. I have seen growers that have used some herbicides in the tunnels that maybe were popular in the fields, and these things just act totally different inside tunnel situations. Things stick around longer, they start moving around. It's just a very, very touchy practice to use herbicides in the tunnels. But again, and that varies again by each state, whether that herbicide label is interpreted one way or another, whether it can be used in the tunnels or not. But if we are controlling those weeds pre-plant or pre-construction of the tunnel, mare's tail, again, we know Roundup's not going to work on that one. Mare's tail has a resistance to Roundup, so that's just not going to work. So we want to keep that in mind. Just keeping the weeds out again. We don't want to have the neighbors coming in, blowing weed seeds into our tunnels. If you're going to use straw mulch in the tunnel, which is a good practice, make sure it is clean and doesn't have a lot of weed seeds in it. If we're using irrigation water, make sure we're not bringing in weed seeds on that. If we bring machinery in, maybe we've been out in the field, come in the tunnel, make sure we don't bring weed seeds on that. And then just remember those previous crops, canola, buckwheat, even tomatoes can actually become a weed in crops following some of those other crops. So keep that in mind. If it gets real bad, this is one area we're doing more and more research in here in Ohio, and some of the other states are, you can just eliminate that soil. We can just eliminate the soil altogether, go with other production techniques. See the bottom left picture? That's just laying bags of soilless mix out, planting your crop right in there, running a drip line through it. I know Michigan State's doing a lot of work with buckets, such as the middle picture with the tomato crop there, just growing in a bucket. We're doing some work on the bottom right there with compost sacks. Now, that has compost in it, so remember, if you're using a weedy compost or one that hasn't been composted correctly, you could have weed problems in there. Believe me, we got it from experience. Where those things are stored means a lot. Say they've been stored in an area that a fence row or behind a barn, them weed seeds can get in there and can cause us some problems. Then we have raised beds. There's different styles of those we can use. And then the soilless, like the top right picture there, maybe like a hydroponic type of a situation where we just eliminate the soil altogether. So that would definitely help us out with weed control. But remember, quality in, quality out if we're using compost, especially with these compost sacks. Always get a compost analysis before we fill those sacks, and avoid those poorly composted compost. And then if you're going to store them, keep them inside in the barn where they're not going to get infested with weeds. Straw mulch is, went by that one. Straw mulch, I don't know what happened to the picture, but just straw mulch can be used in combination with black plastic mulch, and it just makes sure that straw mulch is clean. Black plastic only, then we just have to control the weeds in the middle, but we can also put some landscape fabric or something down in there. This is one of my growers down by Jackson. And this is the picture we talked about before, the black plastic mulch with the rye between the beds. And there's this is a photo from Steve Groff, his farm out there in Pennsylvania, where they will lay this weed mat, the landscape fabric, all across the floor of the tunnel and plant right through it. So again, what did we learn tonight? Know our enemy, know what those weeds are, know which ones we're going to be having to tend with, and let's control them well in advance. Eradicate those perennials the year before at least. Summer fallow them to deplete the weed seed banks, keep tilling them. Prescription weed control, that would be if we're choosing a herbicide or something of that nature, we'd have to select the right herbicide for the right weed species. And just remember, just like our outside fields, that ongoing sanitation, just keeping those weeds out and keeping them from going to seed. So in review, what's going to get us problems? Ignorance of the weed life cycle, poor site preparation, poor sanitation, poor herbicide choice and timing, poor timing of the weed control, non-use of physical and mechanical control, and non-persistence, especially if you're going into an area that maybe is going to be a problem area from the start. Just be persistent. We will eventually reduce those seed banks and hopefully get us up to a good crop. So good luck to all of you. I know you can do it. We've done it many years, and I think we got a few minutes for questions here.
Okay, Brad, thank you very much. I'm looking at the Q&A pod. I don't see a lot of questions come in. Last minute statements you want to give before we move on to Bill Lamont's presentation?
Well, welcome everybody to the webinar, and we've been talking about high tunnels, and I appreciated Brad's presentation. to get control of those weeds before you put your tunnel, because that's the worst nightmare you can ever have, is trying to fight the weeds once your tunnel up, although a good sharp hoe is probably one of the best ways to go, and keep it good and sharp. So we'll go ahead, and I'm going to give you sort of an overview of season extension and sort of actually set the tone for the rest of the webinars, I guess, as we go through the different topics. So season extension, you know, we had floating row covers, low tunnels, high tunnels, you know, used, you know, with or without plastic mulch and drip irrigation, which are a big part of high tunnels also, fall under the season extension, which is part of the plasticulture technology, or the broader use of agricultural production systems that use plastic. So, and what do we mean when we talk about the plasticulture technology? The plastic mulch is the drip irrigation, fertigation, putting your fertilizer through your drip irrigation line, soil sanitation, keeping things clean, and I'm sure others are going to hammer that. Windbreaks, actually windbreaks around the tunnel, you know, a permanent windbreaks, whether it be, you know, the trees, really helps break the wind off of it. You want wind through your tunnel, but you also don't want a lot of really powerful wind. Stand establishment, how do I get the crop started? Season extension, that's where we get into the row covers and the high tunnels. Pest management, Brad touched on the weeds, and you'll hear insects and disease control. Cropping strategies, what do I grow, when do I grow it? Marketing in green, because marketing is where you're going to make your money, unless you're doing it just for fun and enjoying having fresh veggies a longer period of time in the year. And disposal, how do we get rid of the plastics once we're done? Extending the growing season, reasons for doing it. Why are you doing it? Why are you working harder? Why are you going ahead and doing it, you know, for a long period? Well, earlier production could mean higher prices, and I always put could mean. Earlier production could mean you're the first to the market and have an opportunity to lock in your customers. That's a good one. You want to get there first, get the people coming to you. Earlier production means cash flow, and everybody likes to have cash flow start earlier. Earlier production permits better scheduling of your labor. Later production, now we got earlier, now we're going later. That's season extension. Extends the cash flow, so now you got cash flow into Christmas or beyond. Later production may mean winter production and even more cash flow. Earlier and later means more work for you. Remember that. And it's imperative to put the economic pencil on this additional effort that you're doing. Throw in winter production in your farm in 13 months. And I've had growers, I like growers to take a little break, because I know that a long season you get pretty tired at the end of it. So anyway, remember, season extension can be good, and it can, you know, it means a lot more work for you, so think about it. Extend in the growing season. Remember, many of the components of plasticulture provide season extension by themselves and are used in conjunction with the row covers, you know, single row and floating thermal blankets, low tunnels, high tunnels, single multi bay, and now we've got movable tunnels. So a lot of things going on. What we're doing is creating a more favorable environment for plant growth and warmer soil and air temperatures, and reducing the effect of wind. Reducing the effect of wind. That's important. So that's the things that we're doing when we're extending this season. Row covers. Row covers evolved back in the 1950s and 60s out in California, with Bernard Hall did it with cucumbers and tomatoes in San Diego County. Then we moved to slitted row covers, to various spun bonded and polyester fabrics that came out of the diaper industry. If you didn't realize, that's where your floating row covers and some of your single polyester type materials came out of. And then we went to eventually very wide spun bonded, where we could cover multiple rows, cover very quickly multiple rows in the 70s and 80s. So that's acting like, row covers act like a mini greenhouse. And they also can exclude pests. They use it for pest management, and they protect from the effects of wind. And there is some mechanization that you can go ahead and do with row covers. So we have, again, the single row or fabric cover. There you can see it in the upper left. If you have slitted row covers, that was an attempt to go ahead and have a solid cover, but let it ventilate itself instead of you being out there ventilating. And then you have the wide floating covers. And then you can see down in the other corner, mechanical application to which gives you some, the row covers can provide limited protection from frost, but the mechanical for the single row covers, and you can go ahead and put them out, put the hoops down, the wire hoops, and put the cover over top of it mechanically. So high tunnels are the latest technology to be adopted to extend the growing season and in some cases even produce selected cool season crops during the winter months. But as my friend Dr. Matt Kleinhen says, the winter production is just the tunnels acting as a storage unit for the vegetables that you're growing, because actually they're mature and you're harvesting the individual leaves. So the technology is not really new. You know, there's a lot of excitement and I'd say it's exponential growth, but researchers and growers such as Elliot Coleman, Ed Pearson up in New Hampshire, and Dr. Ethel Wells at the University of New Hampshire were investigating the use of high tunnels since the early to mid 80s, and probably some others long before it. And in countries like China and Spain and the Orient that I visited, they've been doing it for eons. So it's not something that just popped up on the radar screen and all of a sudden we're all using tunnels here in the U.S. So it is it's kind of neat there. Okay, I'm looking for my buttons here. Where did they move on me? Okay. High tunnels generally Quonset shaped. We recommend that because of a peak in the bow. They're Quonset shaped, but they have a peak in the bow. In the bows, because for the snow load, we get snow. Now down south it might be a different animal, but up here we get snow. Ground posts in the ground, driven, and depends on the size of the tunnel, how deep and your ground posts are driven. Single layer plastic, 6 mil, greenhouse, no permanent heating or ventilation, but we do have water for irrigation. And then high tunnels are either single or the multiple bay tunnels, such as the Haygrove. This is what high tunnels look like, and there you can see, whoop, wait a minute, I'm moving around there. Somebody's moving me around, okay. High tunnels, there you go, in the wintertime, and the reason for the peak, you can see it down in the corner down there. That's what it looks like at Penn State at our high tunnels in the wintertime. And the other thing you want to do is give your tunnels room, because you want to be out there shoveling all that snow to keep it from climbing up the sides of your tunnels? Probably not. Multiple bay tunnels there, and that's what a high tunnel looks like. So it could be looking like a greenhouse, but it's not. The latest designs that we run into are Rimwall and Four Seasons are making movable tunnel, although I've seen growers for years, you know, been putting them on skids and pulling them with tractors. I think that's how Elliot Coleman did it. I like movable tunnels because the ability to take it off a piece of land, put a cover crop on, and rest it in your rotation. I'm not too sure I like the idea of taking the off a crop that you're trying to protect from the wind. That's, I mean, well, the wind and the rain both, but rain mainly, because then you get into diseases. So I think it's good maybe moving from a perennial crop such as asparagus or rhubarb, and then moving on to a tomato crop and keeping it on your tomatoes to protect them from the elements. But they do have a great usage for cover crops and flushing out your soils there. So I think we'll see more of that. So, but just remember, one of the benefits is to exclude that rain. High tunnels are not a poor man's greenhouse. A reporter did an article there. I told him all about high tunnels, and that was the headlines. Nope, they're not. They're really economic units, improve the quality of life and health of a community. Doing a lot of work in the urban area of Philadelphia, and you're using tunnels for those type of things. So that's what a tunnel is. It's not a poor man's greenhouse. Sizes. Normally they range from 12 feet wide to 30. This is single bays, 30 feet wide, and from 20 feet to 96 feet in length. Commercial size could be for us a single one, 21 by 96, a nice size. The nice thing, you can start out with a 21 by 48 in length and then say, hey, I really like tunnels, and you just add more bows every 4 foot and you got a 96. So you can go ahead and do that. And then multiple bay tunnels, as you saw Steve Groff's unit down there in Lancaster County in Holtwood, is a multiple bay tunnel. So Haygroves are multiple bay. You see a lot of those out in the, they're doing it in Strawberries down in North Carolina, and also Driscoll does it in raspberries out in California. So cover a lot of area. We have the Penn State High Tunnel Research and Education Facility. We started back in '98. We do a lot of education. We probably have about 30 tunnels out there at the site, so it's a great place to visit, see tunnels, see the different sizes, and that gives grower an opportunity to look them over and kick them, which I know growers like to do. Topics, we're going to talk of these topics here. Some of them will be hit on real heavy in other webinars, so I'm not going to get into them real heavy, but they're all important topics in when you're talking season extension or high tunnels. Equipment. Our tunnels, we can flip the ends up and drive a tractor, so we have a little 21 horsepower four-wheel drive tractor. That's how we do our rototilling on the back of it. We have a bucket loader to move compost around in and out of the tunnels, and we have small plastic mulch and drip irrigation application, and we have a walk-behind rototiller. And you see that. So when you lay in plastic, you can see in the upper left there, that's squash and okra in the tunnels with little beds, 18 inches wide, 44 inches between the center of the bed to the center of the bed, similar to what we do in the field. And two machines that are available are Reddick from Williamston, North Carolina, and then Knowles from here in Pennsylvania. So you can actually lay plastic and drip irrigation just like you do in the field in the tunnel. So it works out good. And you can just use a regular Troy build or whatever. The tractor, there it is, tilling, and works well for us. We've had it for since about '98, and it's a great little piece of equipment. Growing systems, plastic mulch and drip irrigation, and we've done all the plastics, the reds, the blues, the, you name it. Raised wooden beds are great. I like them for herbs and things like that, and especially when I go into the urban areas where the soil is suspect, to have a raised bed works real well. Or bare ground, you know, if you have good soil, you can do bare ground. It works quite well. So there are three systems that you can utilize. And you can see in the upper right that we put hoops over it and then put a row cover. So we have row covers inside the tunnels there. And like I said, I use raised beds in the urban area because of the soil, the quality of the soil. And that works real well. And we use soil and compost, mix it in, make a real nice bed, nice growing. And that just shows you. And I love the greens, microgreens, and a lot of the greens and raised beds. It's really neat. And you can do a lot of different things. And then we put straw down between our beds for weed control, like Brad was alluding to, and you want to keep it nice and clean. And sanitation, sanitation, sanitation. Ventilation is important. We orient the tunnels so the prevailing wind, where your prevailing wind will come through the tunnel. That's how we ventilate. So the other thing I'd recommend is a high side tunnel. That's important. And it's probably about 5.5 feet up to that hip board there. You can roll it all the way up, and then you can roll one side up, one side down, depending on your wind velocity, and control your wind. Very critical, because that's how you exhaust the humidity out. That's how you control the environment inside the tunnel. The other side, you see a low-sided tunnel. You lose the ability to really work right up against that edge and without bumping your head. And then there's different vent systems that are available now, but the main thing is ventilation is extremely important. Supplemental heating, yeah, you maybe put a propane burner out there, you know, and just if it gets cold, the temperature goes south, you're not expecting, you got a crop in there, you want to just raise it a few degrees, you can use something like that. And then some growers actually put Modine heaters and have them in there permanently because they don't want to fool around with the supplemental. So it just depends. There's a lot of different options. You have to decide what you can do. Row covers and thermal blankets. Yeah, we use row covers in the tunnel. So we got a tunnel within a tunnel. We use thermal blankets. We throw them over tomatoes at the end of the day in November. We haven't really. I think we had a frost the other night, but we really haven't had a frost. And you can throw them over your tomatoes in the afternoon, trap that heat in there, and then you have to take them off during the daytime. So we use row covers a lot for our greens in the winter, and also our strawberries, as you can see there. We actually had to put a thermal blanket on because they wanted to flower in January. So row covers and thermal blankets are part of the arsenal, the toolkit that you have in season extension within the tunnels and also outside. So Fertigation, yeah. If you're fertigating, you can use dosatrons or mozzies or whatever. You know, remember also when you talk about soil health, and Brad alluded to it, that's the reason I like the movable tunnels. Move it out, let Mother Nature flush it out, and put a cover crop, and then you'll be on the next site. Because hard pans develop when you're using a rototiller under there. It's tough to keep the rototiller, and you get a hard pan. Salts you can see, and the fennel there, you get that white, so salts you can do. But cover crops, you know, I think they're easier to establish outside the tunnels. I like to have cover crops because they improve the soil tilth and stuff, and you want to maintain the organic matter in your tunnels, so that's important. Irrigation, high tunnels, yeah, drip irrigation. Why? You don't want water on the crop. You don't want to get diseases. Paint the PVC black. Keep algae from growing in it. Biocontrol and disease management is going to be touched on, but biocontrol really works in high tunnels. Insects eating insects, predators, works great. It really works nice. And organic growers, yeah, if I was an organic grower, I'd be growing in a high tunnel. Take the rain out of it. I have consistency. Kathy Demchek never sprayed a fungicide for 8 years on her raspberries. Marketing, yeah, quarter-size raspberries, quality cut flowers, early vegetables, blackberries, you name it. Red, white, and blue potatoes. Have the high tunnel for the 4th of July, but marketing is the fun part. Most frequently asked, what crop should I grow? I have no idea. The answer is market-driven. We've grown asparagus to zucchini, small fruits, cut flowers, even ginger in the high tunnels. You can grow anything, almost, but what you can make a profit at depends on your market. So, vegetable crops, you name it. There's just a collage of from garlic to lemongrass to you name it. That's just potatoes. Yeah, we do a lot of potatoes early. Onions, take them out by the truckload there. Onions a good crop. Garlic's a good crop. We grow onions in the tunnels, so a lot of different things there. Tomatoes are the workhorse. Yeah, they've been the first crop usually growers grow. Do an excellent job. I'll give you the economics there, but you can pencil in your own things. And tomatoes usually are profitable. Small fruits, yeah, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. Greg Lang up in Michigan State's doing work on the cherries. Brambles, I'm going to run through this. We have publications on it, but they are economical raspberries. Cut flowers, yeah, a lot of our growers grow cut flowers for the market. Best time to see cut flowers after a big thunderstorm rolls across your place. Then you can look inside the tunnel. Tree fruits, like I said, Dr. Greg Lang in Michigan State's working on cherries. There's some really nice cherries in the tunnels. Keep the bird checking and the rain off of it. I think apricots is a good one, so I'd go for apricots and cherries for me. And they can be in multiple bay tunnels. Single bay, you're going to have a big tunnel, a 30-foot wide one. Have a good sized tunnel there. Plastofuel, yeah, recover your energy. You know, once the plastic's done, we densify it, make it into a plastofuel. Hopefully that can be burned in a power plant, generate electricity. So we're trying to plug in, do our bit for the energy problem we have in the country. Other options, you can take and make a high tunnel, take it from a Model T to a pink Cadillac. You can put heat in it, automate it, but just remember the tax person that comes around will be looking for a non-permanent structure so you don't get taxed accordingly. So you want a non-permanent. You make it too permanent, you could have a tax problem. Penn State Center for Plasticulture website, and we have a lot of information there. We also have publications, High Tunnel Manual, implementation of biocontrol program for insects, and also a big production of vegetables, strawberries, and cut flowers using plasticulture. There are 3 publications that are available from us. The one is an NRAIS publication that goes through everything on plasticulture. Thank you. And are there any questions? There's many people that work with us, myself, Kathy, Mike Orslick, and our agents around the state that have high tunnels out there too. Demo tunnels, and like I said, next week I'm going down putting 3 high tunnels in Philadelphia, and we got more to go in there. So a lot of opportunities. I feel I think it's really a neat technology. I saw a few questions. Do we have some time for questions there?
Yes, Bill,
Jim?
you've got about 5 minutes to go ahead and answer any of the
Okay.
questions in the Q&A pod.
Right. Cameron was talking. I see, Cameron, you asked about the using a cover crop. Yeah, we've used hairy vetch and rye and stuff. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you get them turned under before they get too big on you in the tunnel. But that works really well. We use a lot of compost to maintain our organic matter too, but make sure you know where your compost comes from and that it's clean. So that's good. I'll go back to the URL. Another person wanted to see that for the plasticulture. Lavender, we've done a variety of herbs. I'm not sure. We might have done lavender. But again, we've done just about all the herbs. We use them fresh and we use them dried. They work well. A lot of people use them, use that. So Dwight, lavender probably, but I'm not sure. I'd have to double check. Plastic, we use 6 mil greenhouse plastic. Just get a good greenhouse plastic that, you know, the greenhouse guys. Let me see. Okay. I would say lavender, yeah, cover crops, like I said. I think that's where movable tunnels will really be interesting, and I think there's going to be some really interesting things with movable tunnels. Yeah, we have plans. The mulch layer is available from Nolts and stuff. We don't really have any plans for it, but it, you know, like I said, Reddick Fumigants makes it and Nolts makes it, the little plastic mulch layer. It makes an 18-inch bed, a wide bed about 3 inches high. Let me see. Manufacturers, there's a lot of good manufacturers. I would go ahead and compare the size of pipes, your pipe dimensions and the quality of your piping. There's a lot of, you know, you got to compare apples to apples and oranges. We've used Ledgewood Farms. I'm just saying, we've worked with Ed for years, and Otho Wells worked with Ed way back in the 80s, and he really has a good, strong single bay tunnels that we use. And they go from 30-foot wide all the way. Like I said, we've got a 12 by 20 going in Philadelphia, and we got a 30 by 60 going there. So you can build on a slight incline. I would say slight is the key, and if you do, make sure you have drainage tile or drainage pipe around it. You don't want water running down your incline and coming in your tunnels either from the side or from the end. So that would be what I'd recommend there. But you can go ahead and do it. We like flat ground, of course. But other than that, salt buildup, yeah, the movable tunnel would give you a chance to flush it out. Actually, we do it in our standard stationary tunnels at the end of the life of the plastic, about 4 years. We'll leave it uncovered in the wintertime, let Mother Nature heave it, thaw it, and flush it out for us. So that's what we do there. Plastofuel, it's a densified. What we're doing is densifying plastic. Plastic tends to spring back when you squeeze it. What we do is run it through a tube, and then we put a heat jacket on it, sear it like a steak on the outside that holds the integrity and makes it into a nugget that's easy to transport. So we started working with ag plastics, but we're branching out into consumer plastics now. So I think that's a way to clean up our environment, but at the same time have a fuel. Automatic, yeah, there are automatic ventilation systems available. You can go online, and there's different ones. That's important. Like I said, the orientation, Dwight, we go ahead and orient it so the wind blows through the tunnel because we're interested in that ventilation. There's not really a lot of infrastructure inside a tunnel like a greenhouse, so you know, the orientation for the light, we don't worry too much about that. We mainly want to make sure we got the wind there coming through, Dwight. That's important. Yeah, you could trench around it too. You don't want any flooding coming in the tunnel. You want that water running away from the tunnel too, because it's like a parking lot, just like any greenhouse. Your water's going to run off of it. You don't want water coming.
All right. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Please let me know if you cannot. My objective today is to talk about diseases generally There's going to be 2 other presentations coming along during the rest of the session, talking more specifically about particular crops and the diseases that occur. My objective is to give you some basics, have you walk away knowing what it is about pathogen biology that determines what pathogens can cause diseases in high tunnels and what cannot, so that whatever crop you grow, you can predict what diseases are likely to occur, and you can understand the basics of managing these diseases. So it doesn't matter what crop you have, you can control it and have a productive season. So diseases in high tunnels, the occurrence can be completely unlike the field. There could be some similarities, but there can be some big differences. High tunnels tend to be a lot more like greenhouses, and most of us who work on vegetables in the field don't work in the greenhouse as much, and so don't have the familiarity of what can happen in a protected environment. These pictures were taken on the same day, and you can see quite a huge difference in the diseases there. So to look a little closer, here are the tomatoes out in the field. They've been devastated by septoria leaf spot. This is a pathogen that needs moisture on the leaves. Certainly you get that out in the field, whereas in a high tunnel you have a drier environment. The other thing to notice in this high tunnel, and we'll get into some of these management practices later, but see how the leaves have been removed from the lower parts of the plant, good wide spacing between the rows. These are some important management tactics, and as I said, we'll get to these in a little bit, but I wanted to point them out since they were right here in this particular grower's high tunnel. And this high tunnel this tomato grower has really pulled away from field production because he's had such good success in the high tunnels for his tomatoes. In order for disease to occur, you've got to have the disease triangle occurring. So you've got to have the susceptible crop, and I'm going to assume that we're all talking about a crop being present. And I'm going to pause here for a minute, Jim, because I can see a couple comments of people not seeing slides. So you can decide if we need to pause or if I should keep going. I'll keep going for now, and you can stop me if you'd like. So the number 2 thing you have to have the disease triangle and have disease is to have the pathogen. And when it comes to high tunnels, I like to think about how the pathogen gets in to be the factor that determines whether or not it's going to be there. So not just pathogen being present, it's got to be able to get into the high tunnel. And then the third thing you need to complete the disease triangle is conditions favorable for disease, for infection as well as disease development. So you could have conditions that are great for infection, but if you don't have conditions that allow the pathogen to spread, disease won't develop. One particular example would be if you've got a disease where the pathogen is spread by splashing water. If you don't use overhead irrigation and you don't have condensation forming in your greenhouse and dripping, the pathogen may be able to infect, but that will be the end of it. It won't be able to continue going. So another very important consideration. High tunnels. You roll up those sides and you can see that you've got a huge area where a pathogen or an insect vector can get into the high tunnel. So there's a real opportunity for pathogens to get in to a high tunnel versus in a greenhouse situation. So that's a very important consideration to have. And that's why you're going to want to control weeds right around your greenhouse. If you got a weed out here that is a host to either a disease that can occur in the high tunnel or can have some insect vectors building up into it, the disease, the pathogen rather, can either get right into the high tunnel or the insect vector can get right into the high tunnel, and you can have a problem from there developing. So what are your sources of pathogens for getting into high tunnels? First, you can have wind-dispersed spores. You can have insect vectors coming in the sides, alternative hosts, and these can include weeds, as I just pointed out, being right outside the high tunnel. And then the last is infested seed, as being some of your primary sources. Another is contaminated soil. More often this is if you've had a pathogen in your high tunnel and then it's allowed to remain in the soil and you have troubles in the future. But you can also have contaminated soil coming into a high tunnel either on your boots, your tools. Very important to think about. Don't bring in field soil into your high tunnel. Once a disease has occurred in the high tunnel, the pathogen can remain in infested crop debris. And another thing to think about is whether or not you've ended up with tools that are contaminated or planting supplies. You want to practice good sanitation so that you don't have carryover of pathogens. And this is where you need to understand the biology of your pathogen. Does it even have the ability to survive on your tools and supplies? Does it have the ability to survive in crop debris? Is this a concern with a particular disease? The last factor is the environment to complete that disease triangle. A lot of pathogens need to have wet leaf tissue in order to infect.